Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video. So today I thought I would revisit Beck Hansen, whose music I got really into back in the 90s, and I'll show you the CDs that I've got. I don't have everything, so this video is not going to be a kind of comprehensive look at his entire career. Just going to talk about the albums that I know. So just a quick scattershot preview of what I'm not going to feature. Beck did a couple of independent albums, Golden Feelings in '93, Stereopathetic Soul Manure in '94. They were kind of lo-fi independent releases. I don't have either of those. I have heard those records a long time ago, but I don't have them. And then also he made an album called One Foot in the Grave in '94, which came after he'd already started his major label career, but that was another independent album that he did, which is another lo-fi one. And then I don't have Colours from 2017, which is an album that I just missed out on. Not quite sure how that happened. And Hyperspace in 2019, I did have that one, but I got rid of it as I didn't like it. So everything else I've got, and we'll talk about. So Beck, this is the first record by Beck I ever got. This is Mellow Gold. And I got this back whenever it came out, would have been '94. And the reason I got it, I'd never heard a note of his music, but everybody was talking about him at the time. That's the main memory I've got in the music papers, which I used to read avidly. Everybody was talking about Beck. I remember Damon Albarn from Blur was talking about him. Everybody was talking about him. He was seen as being this kind of Svengali figure, really. So I went out and bought this record and just instantly fell in love with it. I mean, the track Loser at the start, it just blew my mind. It was very, very interesting because I'd never been into hip-hop music really, and it was a kind of music that I was always interested in theory, but I'd never found anything really that grabbed me. Maybe apart from De La Soul and a couple of other things here and there, Grandmaster Flash, but I was not big into hip-hop. And Beck, it was a sort of stroke of genius really, because he kind of melded the hip-hop influences with the Beatles and the Stones and classic rock, and he was a great writer of melodies, and like I said, it just totally blew me away. And for a couple of years I listened to nothing else but Beck. He was absolutely my kind of kingpin hero. And what surprised me going back to all these records, I'll just say now, is just how much I enjoyed all of them. I stopped listening to Beck a few years ago. There's a couple of things that put me off him, a couple of things to do with his personal life, and things I don't really want to get into now, but the more I read about him, the more I decided I didn't really like the sound of him as an individual, so I kind of stopped listening to him. And his music soundtracked my life to such a great extent in the 90s that I kind of figured that if I was to go back to him now, all these years later, it wouldn't really mean anything to me. But having gone back and listened to all these records, I was really taken aback by how much I enjoyed them. This is a fantastic album, if you haven't heard it already. I mean, his lyric writing is just something else, I mean, he combined hip-hop lyrics with beat poetry, French symbolism, all kinds of things, all points in between. What I love about his songwriting, I mean, there are so many songs on this record, Pay No Mind, Soul Sudden Jerk, such an awareness of the possibilities of language, just the phonetic sounds, the cut-up techniques he used. And he did something very clever, which was, it sounded to me like he was writing about my life, but at the same time none of it made any sense. Deeply poetic, it didn't make sense in a literal way, but he filled his songs with just the detritus of modern life. And I think at the time, I was leading a fairly chaotic life at the time. I was on the dole, I was playing in bands, I was indulging in rock and roll excess, shall we say. And it felt to me like Beck was writing about my life, really. And but there was such songcraft there. You couldn't really get a handle on what was so great about it. He seemed always to evade any analysis. His songwriting was so unique and so individual. The track Black Hole at the end of this record was one that I'd forgotten about. I'd forgotten how good it was, But certainly that is a great album from '94. And then in '96, I guess he did his what is still considered his masterpiece, really. Not sure if that's true or not, but Odelay from '96 was the album that he made with the Dust Brothers, who were a very influential production duo. They'd done Paul's Boutique by the Beastie Boys, and this this record was where he really started getting into the sample culture. You know, samples just taken from everywhere, little you know, beatbox stuff and hip hop things and classic rock things, all this kind of incredible stew of sounds and influences. And again, the songwriting on this record, you've got such great, I'd say almost sort of comedic, kind of humorous songs, you know, Devil's Haircut and The New Pollution, Jackass, just very attitudey, very, again, very poetic. And this album really took you on a journey. And in fact, I used to, you know, I made a recording of it. I taped it onto a C90, and it just lived in my car for years. You know, I wasn't going to read out too many lyrics by Beck because there are so many examples of his great lyrics. But there was one example on this record. I think it comes from The New Pollution. Pick yourself up off the side of the road with your elevator bones and your whip-flash tones. Members only hypnotisers move through the room like ambulance drivers. Shine your shoes with your microphone blues. Here's suits with your parachute fruits. A place we saw the lights turn low, the jigsaw jazz and the get fresh flow. It was amazing the way he did this cut-up technique, but he made it flow. And it was always his words. His words really got to me. I mean, the first track on Mellow Gold, I think it starts with Loser, the first song. It starts with the line, "In the time of chimpanzees, I was a monkey." I can still remember listening to that and going, oh yeah, I really want to get into this guy's world, you know, this idea of being in a world of chimpanzees, but you're a monkey. It's that kind of slightly, it's that outsider thing, but done in this really kind of cool, humorous way. The thing about Beck was that he seemed to be hip, and I'd never really been into hip music. I mean, God, the word hip is naff, you know, whatever you want to call it, cool, hip, street level. You know, I'd always been into things like Wings and Queen, so this was a big departure for me, you know, getting into something which seemed to have a genuinely kind of street level appeal. So that was Odelay anyway, huge record for me back in the 90s. And in fact, I remember seeing him on Later with Jules Holland, doing a couple of songs, and I was playing in a band at the time, and me and my friend from the band, we just watched his appearance on Jules Holland. I think he did Jackass, which is the song with the Van Morrison sampling, isn't it? And we just watched it, and I remember thinking, yeah, this guy is the new Messiah. You know, he looked great, he looked cool, great voice, really authoritative singing, all these brilliant songs. He had a fantastic band, everything about him. You know, for a couple of years, he was the real deal. He was the package. He was the man. And I think what I also liked about him was that he was an alternative to the Britpop thing that was exploding everywhere, which I was never a big fan of, really. I found a lot of it quite conformist and quite derivative, whereas Beck was not derivative. He was original. He was a definite original voice. He came through with something unique, his own, and it was so perfectly formed as well. That was the thing. Now, his next album, Mutations, is the one that a lot of people still kind of hold up as, you know, a genuine masterpiece. And this album, let's see, it came out in '98. It was produced by Nigel Godrich from Radiohead fame, and at this point, Beck had started getting into Os Mutantes, you know, the famous Brazilian group from the '60s. There's a song on this record called Tropicalia. So you're getting a bit of a Brazilian influence coming in. But this album was totally different. It was low-key, it was bluesy, it was it was almost like a rock album, really. A very carefully controlled pop rock record with a lot of very ruminative songwriting, introspective lyrics. And one thing I'll say about Beck as well, I mean, he came at just the right time for me in the 90s, because I'd started to get into blues music, really, around about 94, 95. I'd got into the blues. I was buying a lot of blues CDs, listening to people like Skip James and Blind Boy Fuller and all these old scratchy blues things. Skip James, Robert Johnson, and Beck clearly had those influences up his sleeve. But he found a way of doing it in a modern way, I guess. You know, on Odelay and Mellow Gold, he found a way of fusing it with hip hop. And on this record, he kind of turned it into just a modern rock album. With some quite diverse influences. You know, you had the Tropicalia thing, and the song Nobody's Fault But My Own. I mean, that song meant so much to me. You know, by this time this record came out, this was 98, I've gone through a couple of years of what you might call a sort of hedonistic lifestyle and burning a candle at both ends, but I was starting to hit the come down at this point, and I went through a very rough patch for a couple of years, and this album really spoke to me, because it seemed like Beck had come up and then he was starting to come down again. It was almost like a kind of hangover album, and that really spoke to me. So Mutations, and again I was surprised at how great it sounded. 98, this is one of the ones I thought, yeah, I'll listen back to that one, and it won't mean much to me anymore, but it took me straight back to those days, but it also still seems to have a kind of modern day relevance, you know. I mean, you know, I hit 50 this year, and there's a kind of world weary feeling about this record. But then in in '99, he totally rode back on that kind of rootsy thing and made this totally ridiculous album, Midnight Vultures, which was dismissed in some quarters as a hipster joke. There was one review in, you know, one of the music magazines. This is the one where he just goes hell for leather on kind of wacky, weird sounds. You know, he samples Space Invader machines and just all kinds of things going on. It's a very kind of sleazy, trashy kind of album. I mean, it's difficult to describe it. If you've not heard this album, it's just an absolute riot from start to finish. It's fun-loving, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, totally mischievous, totally elusive. God knows what he's singing about. But like I said, it's got a kind of sleazy quality. It reminds me a little bit of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It's got that kind of just mad on the road kind of quality to it. Couple of notable tracks. The track Deborah, it was meant to be him doing Prince, really. I think it was based on Adore by Prince, with a few flashes of David Bowie, Win from Young Americans. And I saw that again on the Jules Holland show, and him doing this absolutely outrageous falsetto, but doing it so brilliantly. And it was that really that made me think, you know, Beck, the thing about Beck was he was gutsy, he was fearless, totally fearless. Just the idea of doing a falsetto vocal like that, I mean, it's kind of Prince level of, you know, falsetto virtuosity or whatever, but totally just raising the bar for everybody and going, right, this is what pop music can be. Anybody else want to try doing something as good as this, you know? But what's quite funny about this record is, at the time, I was playing in a band and I was hanging around on a scene, a kind of musical scene with my band, that were not into this kind of stuff at all. They were into things like the Melvins and the Jesus Lizard and Pavement. They were quite furrow-browed, Sigur Rós, quite into the kind of indie, downbeat indie thing, and they all hated this record, and they particularly hated Deborah. They just saw it as just kind of totally ironic, insincere, plastic, ridiculous pastiche pop music, but I loved it for that reason. And again, I thought I would go back to this one and just think, nah, this is not for me anymore, but I just love listening to it again. Absolutely loved it. From '99, Midnight Vultures. Then we get to 2002 and the album Sea Change, which again was produced by Nigel Godrich, and this one was his breakup album. He'd had a very messy breakup with his girlfriend, and it's his heartbreak record, really. At the time when I first got this, I didn't really like this. It's very slow, it's very miserable. My partner calls it Dreary Beck. And there's another album later which he also calls Dreary Beck. And the first time I heard it, I did think it was a bit dreary. It took a long time to get into it. It's a record that has grown on me over the years. I mean, for me, it gets better as it goes along. The song Round the Bend, Sunday Sun, it's got quite an exotic feel to it. You know, some of the tracks have got kind of Serge Gainsbourg style strings on them. You know, very stylish, colourful textures and very beguiling melodies. But it is a bit of a downer album. You know, I mean, there's no doubt about that. You know, if you want something kind of hip and flashy and upbeat from Beck, don't start with this record. And a couple of guest appearances on this that I wasn't actually aware of. It's got James Gadson on it on drums, the great R&B drummer James Gadson, and also Jason Faulkner as well from the great early 90s power pop band Jellyfish is on this too. Sea Change, 2002, I think it was a big critical success. And I should just say, these records from this point on, this is where Beck starts to really hit pay dirt in terms of being a big chart act. I didn't realise that, because the early albums are the ones that I got really into, and then I kind of lost a bit of interest later on. But during this period, he actually started to have really huge chart success. In fact, his next record, which came out in 2005, was his biggest album commercially. This is Guerrero. So the title gives it away, really. There's quite a lot of sort of Latin influences on this record. You've got things, you know, a few Spanish lyrics coming through. Some good tracks on this album. It's definitely, I think at this point, this is a Dust Brothers record again. At this point, I think you start to hear Beck starting to repeat and recycle a little bit. When you hear this, you think, okay, maybe he's not quite so mould smashing as he was. He's started to reference back to himself. I think at this point, a new adjective had entered the lexicon, you know, Beck-like. This album is definitely Beck-like. It's a good one. It's produced by the Dust Brothers again. It's got Jack White on it, on the track Go It Alone. It's a good album. It's enjoyable. It's solid. It's a good one, but maybe it's sort of starting to come down a little bit, I think, from those you know, earlier albums. For me anyway. Then in 2006, he went back with Nigel Godrich again and did this album, The Information, from 2006, which again I bought when it came out. This is a good album. It suffers a little bit from being too long. It was that period when everybody was making albums that were too long. It's way too long, and it gets less interesting as it goes along. But the first few tracks are really good. Soldier Jane is a great track. Nausea is brilliant. Dark Star, excellent song. But the music, it's starting to sound a bit like, well, he was always accused of doing this, but I never really subscribed to this. But at this point, his music is starting to sound like hipster music, definitely. The thing is, even when it's gone down that route, it doesn't spoil it really, because his lyrics are still fantastic. The word, you know, his word play and just his lyrical outlook are still really interesting and absorbing. So again, I'd say Beck-like, but still, you know, a really enjoyable album. Then in 2008, he teamed up with the producer Danger Mouse, and this is Modern Guilt from 2008. This one is his shortest album. It clocks in at about half an hour. It was recorded apparently after he'd suffered a spinal injury. I'm not sure if that was anything to do with the fact that it was so short, but this is a really, really good album. It's, like I said, it's quite short. It's very atmospheric. It's quite upbeat. The songs just come and go. You know, they don't kind of outstay their welcome, and it all flows together. It's one of Beck's most free-flowing records. You know, the songs seem to complement each other. It's a nice continuum of ideas, lots of good production techniques, just a really good listen. The track Volcano at the end has a kind of downbeat quality to it, very melancholy. Yeah, I'd say that's definitely quite a strong record, and shows him flexing his muscles again creatively, I think, after a period maybe with a couple of albums where he was starting to you know, go back on himself. This one seemed to contain some new ideas. And then I'm going to finish the video with 2014, the album Morning Phase. And this is a really interesting one for me. This again is him returning to the sort of Mutations era, the Sea Change era, doing songs that are very low key, very melancholy, very stately, very introspective. When I first got this record, I did think to myself, oh, it's slow Beck again. I couldn't get into it. So much so that I actually got rid of my CD in the end. I tried it a few times and it just wasn't clicking for me. And then, I can't remember why I went back and bought it again, but I think I saw it in a charity shop and thought, you know what, I'll just give it another chance. So I picked it up, listened to it again, and just totally fell in love with it. And this album, I think, might be his best record. The songwriting is fantastic. Just the melodies, the tunes are so beautiful. I mean, his way with a chord change and his way with a melody and a harmonic progression is kind of second to none. The way he kind of weaves these tunes and these melodies together. And there were just some fantastic songs on this album, and fantastic production flourishes too, very tasteful. A bit sort of electronic in places. The track Blue Moon has got a bit of kind of electronica going on, but you know, the samples, the strings, they're still there, but they're done in a very low-key way, very tasteful way. And yeah, I now just totally love this record. Fantastic. So the last couple of albums, Colours from 2017, I've got a feeling I might have picked that up and listened to it a couple of times, and again I didn't like it, so maybe I need to go back to that one. Hyperspace, I must admit, I picked that up on vinyl, gave it a couple of listens, and it wasn't really for me, really. It sounded like he was starting to follow the pop herd, really. It's produced by Pharrell Williams, and to me it lacked that sense of originality. Beck always had a kind of outsider status, and he sounds now, you know, in his middle age, like he's kind of trying to get back on the pop bandwagon a bit, and it doesn't quite work for me. Perhaps I'll hear it again another time and think it's a work of genius, I don't know. But it was certainly a great surprise to go back to these records, not really expecting anything of them, and just to realise, actually, I still really love Beck's music. So yeah, I'd be interested to know what people think. Beck is not an artist that I hear a lot about on the vinyl community. I mean, you know, people mention him occasionally, but I don't see his records shown very often. Don't hear him talked about. So it would be interesting to hear what people think of Beck's music. So I hope that was enjoyable, and I'll be back soon. Take care. Bye bye.